Kendrick Adeyemi had everything Lagos could offer. Glass towers with his name on them, a penthouse that kissed the clouds, cars that hummed like secrets, and a reputation that made investors rise when he walked into a room. He was the kind of man who could buy silence, respect, and desire with a single call. Yet his chest felt hollow, like a drum that had lost its rhythm. That evening, he sat on a cream leather couch in his best friend Deo's modest but warm living room. The air smelled of jollof rice and laughter. Deo's wife, Simi, was in the kitchen humming softly as she fried plantain. And their little boy, Tolu, chased a blue toy car across the rug, giggling with all the energy of a life that didn't know burden. Kendrick watched quietly, one hand wrapped around a glass of whiskey that had long lost its chill. The clinking sound of Tolu's toy against the furniture pulled him back to the present. He smiled faintly. "I don't know what I'm missing," he said finally, his voice low but heavy with truth. Deo turned from where he sat, raising a brow. "You? Missing something? You've got it all. Bro, money, power, and that fine babe. What's her name again?" "Vanessa," Kendrick replied, almost mechanically. "Right?" Deo nodded with a knowing grin. "You've even got someone to share it all with. So what's this talk about missing something?" Kendrick stared into his drink. The golden liquid caught the light, but it didn't shine enough to blind the ache inside him. "It's like I wake up every day surrounded by everything I ever wanted. And still, it feels like nothing." Deo leaned back. "Get married, start a family." Steadied me. "Maybe it'll steady you too." From the kitchen, Simi called out with a playful laugh. "Don't let him fool you, oh. He almost ran away the week before our wedding." They all laughed, but Kendrick's laughter faded the quickest. He thought of Vanessa again. Her perfect pictures, her flawless makeup, her filtered smiles. She looked good beside him at events, always camera-ready, always saying the right things. But at home, conversations felt like interviews. She talked more about brand deals than dreams, more about likes than love. Still, he wondered if marrying her would fill the space in his chest. Maybe building a home, one like Deo's, where laughter echoed off cheap tiles instead of expensive silence, would finally make him feel alive again. Later that night, as he drove back to his penthouse overlooking the city lights, Kendrick passed through busy streets filled with people chasing something. Money, love, peace, maybe even themselves. He envied them. When he stepped into his marble living room, Vanessa's voice echoed from the balcony, soft and melodic, rehearsing for a brand partnership video. She looked stunning, as always, but something in her eyes reflected the same emptiness he carried. And in that moment, Kendrick realized having everything meant nothing if it couldn't make him feel human again. The morning sun sliced through the blinds of Kendrick's penthouse, casting golden bars across the marble floor. The city was already awake. Car horns, vendors shouting, life buzzing below his high-rise calm. He adjusted his tie, grabbed his briefcase, and was halfway to the door when his assistant, Chioma, stepped in, clutching a tablet like a shield. "Sir," she began carefully, "before you leave, you need to see this." Her tone carried a hesitation that instantly set him on edge. Chioma wasn't one for drama. She was precise, loyal, and unshakably professional. Kendrick lowered his briefcase. "What's wrong?" She tapped the screen and handed it to him. A spreadsheet glowed to life, endless rows of transactions flowing like a river of betrayal. Designer bags, hair appointments, shoes, spa retreats, weekend getaways. The kind of purchases that looked like joy but smelled like excess. Each amount glared at him. Nigerian naira 1.2 million here, 800,000 Nigerian nairas there. Money withdrawn from his personal account. Repeatedly, Kendrick frowned. "These can't all be mine." "They're not," Chioma said quietly. "They're from the card registered under Ms. Vanessa's name." For a moment, the air felt too thin. The hum of the city faded beneath the roar of disbelief in his head. He scrolled further: Dubai, Paris, Mauritius. Trips she had taken for brand collaborations. He remembered funding those vacations because she'd called them investments in her career. How long has this been going on? he asked, his voice clipped. Almost a year, sir. Kendrick's jaw tightened. He prided himself on trusting those close to him, on never micromanaging, on believing love didn't need receipts. But now, staring at this parade of luxury, he realized that maybe numbers didn't lie. People did. He handed the tablet back. Thank you, Chioma. You did the right thing. Sir, what will you do? Nothing, he said after a pause. Not yet. All day, meetings blurred into static. Words floated past him. Profit margins, quarterly growth, mergers, but nothing stuck. He'd built an empire from discipline and trust. Yet he couldn't control the one thing that mattered most. By evening, he was back home. Vanessa greeted him at the door wearing one of the silk robes he'd bought her from Paris. She kissed his cheek lightly, smelling of expensive perfume. You're home early, she said with that practiced smile. He smiled back, faintly. Missed you, she giggled, looping her arms around his neck. Ah, that's rare. Did someone have a rough day? He didn't answer. He just held her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, wondering what it cost to maintain this illusion. She curled against him that night, sweet and soft, murmuring stories about her day. Brand shoots, influencer drama, new hair deals. Kendrick lay beside her in silence, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He thought of Deo's wife laughing in their warm kitchen. He thought of the spreadsheet, cold, factual, unforgiving. He wondered what sweetness cost, and how much longer he could afford to pay for something that didn't feel like love. The ceiling fan spun slowly above them, whispering the truth he refused to say aloud. Numbers don't lie, but hearts often do. Kendrick Adeyemi had always believed his house was silent because peace lived there. But that week, when he took time off work without a word to anyone, he discovered it wasn't silence. It was fear. No boardrooms, no morning traffic, no calls from investors, just the quiet theater of his own home, where every sound seemed amplified, the soft shuffle of slippers, the clinking of dishes, the murmurs that faded whenever he entered a room. He told Vanessa he wanted a week of rest, claiming burnout. She believed him easily, maybe because she was too busy to care. Between photo shoots, brand calls, and endless unboxings for her followers, she floated through the mansion like a celebrity on set, never once noticing that her audience had changed. Kendrick began to watch her when she thought no one saw. He watched her order the maids around like soldiers, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. Must I do everything myself? She snapped one morning when the table wasn't set to her liking. Use your head, not just your hands. The youngest maid, barely 19, trembled as she adjusted the silverware. When the cook brought soup that was slightly too salty, Vanessa dipped the spoon, tasted, and smacked the woman's wrist. Do I pay you to make me sick? The cook muttered an apology, eyes glistening. From the shadow of the corridor, Kendrick froze. He'd seen Vanessa angry before, at traffic, at trolls online, but this was different. This wasn't irritation. It was cruelty. Each day peeled back another layer. When the laundry maid accidentally scorched a dress with the iron, Vanessa's scream filled the hall. This gown costs more than your life. Are you mad? The girl dropped to her knees, begging. Vanessa waved her off like dust. The staff moved on tiptoe now, their fear a living thing. When they saw Kendrick approaching, their eyes flicked toward him with silent pleas. He wanted to tell them to relax, that they were safe, but could he promise that anymore? By night, Vanessa became soft again, laughing against his chest, tracing lazy circles on his skin, asking what color he liked best for her next brand deal outfit. The transformation was dizzying. By day she was fire. By night, she was silk. Kendrick lay awake those nights, feeling her breathing steady against his shoulder, and wondered which version of her was real. By the seventh day, the air in the mansion had turned thick. He couldn't pretend anymore. He dressed quietly, ignoring her question about why he was leaving early. That evening, he met Deo at their usual spot, a quiet bar tucked into the corner of Lekki Phase 1, where businessmen came to forget their crowns. Deo was already there, sipping palm wine. You look like a man who's seen a ghost, he said as Kendrick sat down. Maybe I have. Kendrick rubbed his temples. I don't want to marry wrong, Deo. I thought Vanessa just liked luxury, but she spends like money is air. And the way she treats people, he trailed off, shaking his head. It's like she's wearing kindness as makeup. Wash it off and there's nothing underneath. Deo leaned forward, eyes serious now. You can't build a home on image, my brother. I've seen what happens when a man marries a face instead of a heart. Kendrick sighed. I don't even know what's real anymore. Then don't guess, Deo said firmly. Find the truth. Marriage isn't luxury. It's choosing a soul. Those words followed Kendrick home like an echo he couldn't shake. That night, as he lay beside Vanessa's sleeping form, her face angelic under the dim light, he realized he didn't just want to find the truth, he needed it. And if he had to become someone else to see her true self, then so be it. The decision came like a dare whispered to his own reflection. Kendrick stood before the mirror in his walk-in closet, surrounded by rows of designer suits and colognes that smelled of success, and said quietly, I'll act broke. Deo, who had come over that night after another long talk, stared at him as though weighing the sanity of his best friend. You'll what? I'll act broke, Kendrick repeated, straighter this time. If she loves me, she'll stay. If she doesn't, she'll leave, and I'll finally know what I'm dealing with. For a long moment, Deo said nothing. The ceiling fan hummed, slicing through the tension. Then he sighed and nodded slowly. If this is what you need to see clearly, you have my blessing. But be ready for whatever truth comes. Sometimes, it's heavier than lies. Kendrick gave a humorless smile. I've carried worse. The next morning, the plan was set. Chioma was in on it, hesitant but loyal. At exactly 8:45 a.m., while Vanessa sipped her smoothie and scrolled through her phone, Kendrick's phone rang on speaker. Sir, Chioma said, her voice trembling on cue. Our systems were breached overnight. Huge transfers. Someone's moving money out fast. We're freezing all accounts until we can trace it. Vanessa's head snapped up. What? Kendrick pinched the bridge of his nose, pretending to steady himself. How bad is it, Chioma? Almost everything, sir. The company's stable, but your personal accounts, they're empty for now. He ended the call, letting the silence sit thick between them. Then, with a tired sigh, he said softly, We'll be okay. It's just money. Vanessa blinked, processing. What do you mean just money? You lost everything. Temporarily, he lied. But until things stabilize, we'll have to cut down expenses. Maybe you could sell one of your bags so we can manage for the week. Her mouth fell open. Sell? My bags. She looked at him like he'd suggested she sell her own skin. Kendrick tried to sound calm. It's just till we figure things out. She stepped back, shaking her head. You're careless, Ken. You always think money grows on trees. Why should I suffer because you were reckless? Her tone wasn't anger, it was disgust. That night, she refused dinner. The next morning, she ignored him completely. By the third day, she announced an urgent trip to Abuja for a brand shoot. She didn't bother explaining further. When Kendrick came home that evening, her wardrobe was half empty. Her perfume lingered in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. No note, no call, just silence. He sat alone on the couch, staring at the city lights flickering through the window. The penthouse that once felt grand now echoed like an abandoned theater after the play had ended. He'd expected it, maybe even prepared for it, but the truth still sliced deep. He'd loved her in his own quiet way, or maybe loved what he thought she could be. But love built on image was never real, it was performance. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and exhaled the truth that hurt most because he'd already known it all along. His fear was right. The night had teeth. It bit at Kendrick's skin as he stumbled out of the bar, the bitter burn of whiskey still curling in his chest. The city lights swam before his eyes, blurry constellations of yellow and red that refused to stay still. The laughter of strangers echoed somewhere behind him, and he felt smaller with every step. He hadn't planned to drink this much. He just needed quiet, something to drown out the sound of Vanessa's absence. The silence she left behind was louder than her presence had ever been. The bar's dim lights and sad music had felt like home for a moment, until they didn't. He didn't take his car. He didn't trust himself. Instead, he walked, muttering to the night like an old man lost in memory. Everything gone. Maybe it's better this way. Then it happened, a soft collision, followed by a startled gasp. Hey, careful. He blinked and saw her. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, wearing a faded yellow dress that had seen too many suns. Her hair was tied back, her feet bare, her belly round, pregnant, he realized too late. And yet her eyes, they carried something unbreakable. Courage worn like second skin. Sorry, he slurred, trying to steady himself. She caught his arm before he could fall again. You shouldn't be out here like this, she said, her voice calm, almost motherly. Kendrick laughed dryly. You sound like someone's wife. Maybe, she replied, but not yours. That honesty cut sharper than any insult could. He tried to pull away, but his legs betrayed him. Leave me. I'll be fine. She shook her head. No, you won't. You'll freeze before morning or worse. Her tone was gentle but commanding. Before he could argue, she looped his arm over her shoulder. She was smaller than him, but somehow her strength didn't waver. Step by step, she guided him down the dimly lit street, her breath coming in small, controlled gasps. Where are we going? He asked between hiccups. Somewhere safe, she said simply. They reached an unfinished building at the end of a dusty road. Tarps flapped weakly in the wind, the air smelling of wet cement and forgotten dreams. She led him through the broken doorway into a corner where a small mat lay on the floor. A lantern flickered nearby. Sit, she said. He obeyed, too tired to argue. She fetched a small blanket from her things, thin and worn, and placed it over him. You'll catch cold. He looked at her, eyes heavy. You don't even know me. Maybe, she said, lowering herself to the ground beside him. But you needed help. That's enough. He wanted to thank her, but sleep stole the words before they could form. The world dimmed, the spinning stopped, and for the first time in weeks his chest didn't ache. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, watched him until his breathing evened. Then she leaned back against the wall, one hand resting protectively on her belly. The other stayed close to the mat, as if guarding not just her unborn child, but the stranger fate had dropped at her feet. And as the city hummed in the distance, two broken lives found quiet in the same forgotten corner. The first thing Kendrick felt was the hard floor beneath his back and the strange quiet of a place untouched by luxury. His eyes fluttered open to meet the dull gray of concrete and a roof of tarpaulin that trembled in the early breeze. For one panicked second his heart leapt. Kidnapped? But then the air told him otherwise. There were no ropes, no menacing shadows. Only the soft hum of morning and the faint rustle of life beginning somewhere outside. He sat up slowly, his head pounding from last night's drink. His suit jacket was folded neatly beside him, creased, but clean. His wristwatch still there. His wallet too. Whoever had brought him here hadn't taken a thing. The smell of instant coffee drifted toward him before he saw her. The pregnant woman from the night before stepped into the room, balancing two cracked mugs. Her dress was still the same faded yellow, her hair tied back loosely, but in the daylight, she looked even younger and somehow stronger. You're awake, she said, setting one mug down beside him. You were drunk. I couldn't leave you on the road. Kendrick blinked at her, speechless for a beat. He wasn't used to this kind of kindness, the kind that didn't come with an invoice or a hashtag. He accepted the coffee, its taste bitter and cheap, but oddly grounding. Thank you, he said finally. His voice came out rough. She gave a small smile and sat across from him, her hand resting on her belly. Zara, she said after a moment, offering her name like a small lamp in a dark room. Kendrick, he replied quietly. I guessed, she said. You looked like someone who once wore wealth like perfume. That startled a laugh out of him. Once, she shrugged. Last night you didn't look like it anymore. Her honesty disarmed him. For the first time in a long while, Kendrick didn't feel the need to perform, to pretend or polish his words. They sat in silence, the city's noise filtering faintly through the unfinished walls. He wanted to tell her everything, that he wasn't truly broke, that the fall was staged, that he'd been testing love like a hypothesis gone wrong. But as the morning light caught the curve of her belly and the grit on her sandals, another thought formed. What if I stayed poor, really stayed, and saw who I am to people when there's nothing to offer but myself? The idea settled in his chest, strange but thrilling. For once, he wanted to understand what life felt like without the armor of privilege. Maybe this was his chance. Not to lose himself, but to find what was left of him beneath the shine. He excused himself gently, stepping outside to make a call. "Chioma," he said when she answered. "Sir, are you okay?" "We've been trying to." "I'm fine. Listen carefully. Move my car somewhere safe. Rent me a small place nearby. Basic, nothing fancy. Cash payments only. Today." There was a pause. "Sir, are you sure?" "Yes," he said. "Don't tell anyone where I am, especially Deo. I need space to breathe." By afternoon it was done. When he returned to the tarpaulin room, the sun was dipping lower. Zara was there, trying to repair a torn corner of the tarp. He watched the effort it took her to bend, the way she winced and pressed a hand to her side. Dust clung to her feet, yet her posture carried quiet dignity. "Zara," he said softly. She looked up. "Come with me," he blurted out. "Please, just for tonight. It's safer where I'm going." Her brows furrowed. "I don't need pity, Mr. Kendrick." "It's not pity," he said quickly. "It's gratitude. You helped me when you didn't have to. Let me return it. Just a place to rest, food to eat." She hesitated, pride stiffening her spine. But when he repeated the request, gentle, earnest, her eyes softened. She looked down at her swollen belly, then back at him. At last, she nodded. And in that small motion, Kendrick felt something shift inside him, like a door opening quietly, letting in the first light of who he might become. The new apartment was nothing like the world Kendrick once knew. The paint peeled in lazy curls, the ceiling fan wheezed like an old man catching breath, and the single window faced a wall that caught no sun. Still, to Zara it was shelter. To Kendrick it was a quiet beginning. He dropped his borrowed bag on the floor and looked around. The place smelled faintly of dust and detergent, the kind of scent that belonged to lives rebuilt from scratch. "You take the bedroom," Kendrick said, gesturing toward the smaller door. "I'll sleep out here." Zara blinked, one hand absently on her belly. "Are you sure?" "I insist," he replied, already spreading an old sheet on the worn sofa. For a second, she studied him, as if trying to read what kind of man gave up comfort so easily. Then she nodded, soft-spoken but firm. "All right." By dawn, the apartment began to breathe. Zara moved quietly but with purpose. She swept the floor, wiped the dusty walls, arranged the few belongings they had into neat corners. The place began to hum with her presence. Alive, disciplined, unpretending. When Kendrick finally stirred, she was in the tiny kitchen area, steam rising from a dented pot. "You're up," she said, her back to him. He nodded, still groggy. "Sit," she added, setting a chipped plate on the table. On it sat a modest meal, pap and fried plantain. Kendrick hesitated, unused to being served anything not plated in porcelain. "You cooked." "I had a little maize flour left," she said, shrugging. "Eat before it gets cold." He obeyed, taking a cautious bite. It was simple but comforting in a way he hadn't felt in years. He found himself chewing slowly, as if afraid to break the spell. "Thank you," he murmured. Her smile was small but warm. "Don't thank me. Just eat." He realized then that her thank you earlier, when he offered her the room, had sounded less like gratitude and more like reassurance. A quiet "don't worry, I've got this." Days slipped into a rhythm neither planned. Zara woke early, always first to greet the morning. She cleaned, swept, and made sure every cup had a place, every moment a purpose. She asked if he slept well, if he'd eaten, if he'd saved some money. Her care wasn't the sweet talk of affection. It was the steady pulse of someone who understood survival. Kendrick tried to help. He bought groceries, fixed a leaking tap, and insisted she rest. Each time she refused like a polite storm. "You're not used to doing nothing, are you?" he teased once. She smiled faintly. "And you are." They laughed. It was rare, but genuine. In the evenings they talked about small things mostly. She told him about her cravings, her late husband who died in an accident before she could tell him about the baby, her dreams of starting a small tailoring shop once she gave birth. Kendrick listened, not as a CEO but as a man relearning how to hear. They were not dating. There were no glances heavy with meaning, no touches that lingered. But something was forming. A quiet companionship built on shared loneliness and gentle respect. Zara began to remember how he liked his tea, no sugar, lots of milk. She rubbed balm on his temples when headaches clawed at him and laughed at things only kind people notice, like the way the neighbor's rooster crowed at 3 a.m. And somewhere between those laughs and silences, Kendrick began to feel something he hadn't in a long time: peace. Not the kind that came from success, but the kind that came from being seen. That night, the light went out without warning. One blink of the bulb, a soft sigh, and then darkness. Outside, the city murmured its usual lullaby of distant generators and barking dogs. But inside their two-room apartment, silence wrapped around them like a blanket. Zara didn't move right away. She was sitting on the floor, folding the day's washed clothes, the curve of her belly a quiet shadow against the dim light seeping in through the window. Kendrick, lying on the sofa, stared into the dark ceiling where the fan had stopped spinning. "Power again," he muttered. She said softly, the sound closer to a sigh than a word. For a while they said nothing. The air was thick but peaceful. Then, from somewhere deep in the quiet, Kendrick found himself asking, "How did you get here, Zara?" There was the faintest pause, the kind people take before touching an old wound. Then she breathed in and out, steady but slow. "I walked in on my ex with someone else," she began. Her voice was low, fragile but sure. "He didn't even try to hide it. I just left. I didn't shout, didn't fight. I think I was too tired to." Kendrick turned slightly, his eyes trying to find her shape in the dark. "I went back to my friend's place," she continued. "Told her it was over. She tried to console me, but every morning I woke up empty. Then, weeks later, I realized I was pregnant." Her voice wavered then, just a bit. "I told him. He laughed, said it wasn't his. I stopped calling after that." Kendrick's chest tightened. "Zara." She shook her head, though he couldn't see it. "I tried to be strong. I told myself I'd be fine. But depression is a deep river. Once you step in, it pulls you without asking if you can swim." He listened, barely breathing. "I started missing work," she said. "I was a tailor's apprentice. My hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. Rent piled up. My landlord gave me warnings, then pity, then silence. And one day, I came home and found my things outside. I begged. But," she trailed off, the words dissolving. "No one wants to hire a pregnant woman who looks like she might cry," she said finally, almost whispering. "So I wandered until I ended up in that unfinished building. At least there, no one could throw me out again." The silence that followed was heavy but holy, like a prayer too deep for words. Kendrick's throat ached. He had spent his life surrounded by luxury, but in that moment, he felt stripped of everything that ever made him feel important. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly. She gave a small laugh that wasn't laughter. "Life isn't about what we deserve, Kendrick. It's about what we do with what we get." Her words lingered in the dark, soft and true. He turned his head toward her silhouette. Her hand rested over her belly, fingers spread wide as if promising her unborn child a better tomorrow. And in that gesture, simple, maternal, defiant, he saw a kind of strength he'd never known. He thought of the people who had betrayed him, Vanessa, the hollow smiles, the shallow affection, and realized he had never truly understood suffering. "I thought I knew pain," he told himself, "but she has carried a heavier weight and still offers warmth." The night remained dark, but something inside him flickered to life, a fragile ember of understanding, of gratitude. He didn't say it aloud, but in that stillness, Kendrick made himself a silent promise. To be the kind of man who would never let light go out of a woman like Zara's life again. The days that followed were quieter, softer, like the city had learned to whisper around them. Kendrick and Zara found rhythm not in wealth or plans, but in the small, steady beats of ordinary life. Each evening, after the worst of Lagos traffic had simmered down and the air filled with the scent of roasted suya and dust, they'd take slow walks through the streets. Zara waddled a little now. Her belly was rounder, heavier, but she never complained. Kendrick often walked beside her with his hands in his pockets, stealing glances at her whenever she smiled at something simple. Children chasing tires, lovers arguing over roasted corn, the noise of a city that never truly slept. Sometimes he took her to the small clinic nearby for checkups. He would sit in the waiting area, pretending to scroll through his phone, while really listening for her laughter from inside the doctor's office. Every time she came out, she'd have that same soft smile that somehow erased the heaviness of the day. Afterward, they'd stop by a roadside shop and share a plate of rice and beans, spicy and smoky from the fire. It became their little ritual. "This money," Zara said one evening, tapping the bill on the table. "Give me half next time. I'll cook stew that will last 3 days." Kendrick grinned. "Are you saying my taste buds can handle that?" "You'll learn," she teased. "We'll start from pepper control. Then teach me," he said. That weekend they did. The kitchen, though small and half-furnished, became their playground. Kendrick was clumsy with the knife, chopping onions like he was fighting them, tears streaming down his face while Zara laughed so hard she had to sit. "You're wasting onions," she scolded, though her tone was warm. "You're wasting my tears," he shot back, making her laugh even harder. They moved around each other easily, bumping shoulders, trading spoons, arguing over salt. She stirred the pot while he washed plates, badly. Every few minutes she'd stop to correct him, shaking her head. "You're too gentle. Plates aren't babies." By the time the stew was done, the apartment smelled alive. Tomatoes, pepper, laughter. Kendrick tasted it and nearly groaned. "You're dangerous, Zara." She smiled proudly. "Told you." For the first time in months, Kendrick felt known. Not as a CEO, not as a symbol of success or a walking fortune, but as a man. A man with tired eyes, clumsy hands, and a laugh that someone actually wanted to hear. That night, as they ate from the same bowl, he realized something had shifted inside him. The emptiness that had once been vast and cold now felt smaller, warmer, like it was being gently filled with things that couldn't be bought. A few days later, he met Deo at their usual bar. Kendrick told him everything. The lie, the disguise, Zara, her strength, her baby. He left nothing out. Deo listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Kendrick finally stopped talking, the air between them hung heavy with unspoken meaning. "So," Deo said at last, "you're telling me this woman, a stranger, pulled you out of your own storm?" "Yes," Kendrick said simply. "She didn't know who I was. She just helped. And somehow, she makes me want to be better." Deo leaned back, studying his friend. "She's pregnant, yes, but you say she makes you better." He paused, then smiled faintly. "Then the question isn't about her past. It's about your heart. Can you love her? And the child that's not yours?" Kendrick looked down, tracing the rim of his glass. "I already do, Deo. I think I already do." Deo reached across the table and clapped his shoulder. "Then you have my blessing, brother. Not for the love you found, but for the man you're becoming." And in that small, dimly lit bar, Kendrick realized that healing doesn't always come loud. Sometimes, it arrives in small bowls of stew, shared laughter, and the hand of a woman who teaches you how to be human again. Kendrick had rehearsed the truth 100 times in his mind. Yet when morning came, his throat still felt tight. Secrets, he'd learned, were heavy things, beautiful at first because they protect, but poisonous when left too long. He could not love Zara while pretending to be someone else. He dressed carefully, not in the plain shirts she was used to seeing, but in a navy blue suit that still held the scent of his old life, success, boardrooms, and lies. The weight of the wristwatch on his arm felt unfamiliar, almost shameful now. Each polished detail was a confession waiting to be spoken. When he reached the apartment door, he hesitated. The hallway was quiet, his reflection faint in the dusty window. Then, before he could lose his nerve, he knocked. The door swung open, and there she was, Zara, her face lighting up with instant relief. "Where did you sleep?" "I was worried," she said, her words tumbling out like someone who had carried fear all night. But then she stopped. Her eyes widened as they scanned him. The pressed suit, the gold watch, the posture that didn't belong to an ordinary man. "Kendrick?" she whispered, the name suddenly feeling foreign on her tongue. He exhaled slowly. "My name is Kendrick Adeyemi," he said, each word heavy with guilt. "I'm a billionaire." The word sounded ugly in the small room. She blinked, stunned. "What?" "The story about being hacked," he continued, his voice low. "It wasn't true. It was a test. I needed to know if Vanessa, my ex, loved me for who I was." Zara went still, her expression unreadable. "I should have told you sooner," Kendrick rushed on, words tumbling over themselves. "I didn't mean to deceive you. I didn't want to use you. I just needed to understand." Her hand rose sharply, silencing him. Her eyes glistened, not with awe, but with betrayal. "I trusted you," she said softly, the tremor in her voice more painful than a scream. "I told you my shame, my story. You hid your truth." "I'm sorry," he said, stepping closer. She backed away. "You wore poverty like a costume," she said, voice cracking. "I wore it like skin." The words hit him square in the chest. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Tears spilled freely now, not dramatic, just quiet streams of hurt. "Do you know what it means to sleep hungry? To pray the rain doesn't fall because your roof leaks? You played that life for answers. I lived it because I had no choice." "Zara, please." "No," her tone sharpened, pain turning into anger. "You pitted me in disguise, didn't you? Was I your charity project? Your lesson in humanity?" He shook his head, desperate. "No. You're the one who changed me. You made me remember who I am. You made me human again." Her breath came uneven. "Then you should have trusted me with the truth." Silence filled the room, thick, final. The suit, once a symbol of his power, now felt like a wall between them. Finally, she whispered, "Leave, Kendrick. Please." He hesitated, hoping she'd change her mind, hoping the kindness he'd seen in her eyes still lived somewhere behind the hurt. But she turned away, one hand on her belly, the other wiping tears that refused to stop. As he stepped outside, the corridor lights flickered weakly. For the first time in his life, Kendrick Adeyemi, billionaire, genius, builder of towers, felt small. Not because he had lost love, but because he realized how deeply he'd broken something pure. The argument was still burning when it happened. Zara's voice had been rising, pain, anger, betrayal spilling out in trembling words. Kendrick stood before her, helpless, stripped of every excuse he once thought was enough. Then, mid-sentence, her face twisted, her breath caught. "Ah," she gasped, clutching her belly. He blinked, startled. "Zara?" Her knees buckled. "The baby!" The room spun into chaos. The suit jacket fell from his shoulders as he lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. "It's okay. I've got you," he whispered, though fear clawed at his throat. He carried her down the stairs, shouting for help. The security guard ran ahead to flag a taxi, and Kendrick climbed in with Zara in his arms, her fingers gripping his sleeve with desperate strength. "Hold on," he said. The driver cursed the traffic, honking, swerving through Lagos chaos. "Oga, everywhere blocked." "Then fly," Kendrick barked, his voice cracking. "I'll pay you triple. Just get us there." Zara groaned beside him, her face slick with sweat. "Don't leave me." "Never," he said, holding her hand tight. "I'm right here." By the time they reached the hospital, Kendrick's heart was pounding so loud he couldn't hear the nurse's instructions. They wheeled Zara away on a stretcher, and the last thing he saw was her hand reaching toward him before the double doors closed. Time melted into fluorescent hours. The waiting room hummed with other lives, people crying, pacing, praying. But all Kendrick heard was the echo of his own guilt. He paced the tiled floor, palms pressed together, whispering apologies to the ceiling. Please, God, don't let anything happen to her. Don't punish her for my lies. Minutes bled into hours. He could feel the weight of every mistake pressing on his chest. For all his billions, he couldn't buy peace, or forgiveness, or time. Then suddenly, there it was. A cry. Sharp, fragile, beautiful. He froze, every muscle still. The sound sliced through the sterile air like light breaking through storm clouds. A nurse appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Congratulations, sir," she said softly. "It's a boy." The world tilted. He followed her inside, his legs trembling. Zara lay pale but radiant, her hair damp against her forehead, eyes red and exhausted. Yet when she saw him, something in her gaze softened. Perhaps because in that moment, they were just two people bound by the same miracle. A nurse placed the baby in his arms, and Kendrick washed his hands carefully before taking the tiny bundle. The child was impossibly small, wrapped in white. His face scrunched as he breathed his first confused breaths. Kendrick stared down, a lump forming in his throat. "Hey there, little man," he whispered. "You made it." He turned to Zara, tears shining in his eyes. Then, slowly, he knelt beside her bed. The suit that once made him powerful now rumpled and meaningless. "I lied," he said, his voice low, trembling. "I was a coward. I thought testing love would protect me from getting hurt again. But you showed me what love really is. It's not about proving anything. It's about staying when everything falls apart." Zara looked at him through tears, silent. He reached out, brushing his thumb gently across her hand. "But this child, this moment, this is the truest thing I've ever known. Please, Zara, be my family. Let me make it right." The baby stirred, his tiny hand brushing Kendrick's finger like a blessing. And in that fragile space, between regret and forgiveness, between endings and beginnings, Zara finally let her tears fall. Maybe love didn't need perfect people. Maybe it only needed broken ones willing to heal together. Days later, the little apartment that had once smelled of dust and detergent now breathed with life. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, landing on the cradle where baby Ao slept, his tiny chest rising and falling with size too big for his small body. The room was full of quiet miracles. Flowers from Deo and Simi crowded the windowsill, their petals brushing the glass whenever the wind passed. The faint aroma of stew lingered in the air, and somewhere outside, a hawker's voice broke through the hum of Lagos, selling bread to a city that never paused. Zara sat propped up on the bed, her hair loosely tied, her eyes half tired, half wondering. Across the room, Kendrick stood by the table, focused in a way he never had been even in his boardrooms. In his hands was a diaper, and a look of intense concentration. "You're terrible at this," Zara said, her voice soft but teasing. He glanced up with mock offense. "I'm improving. Slowly. You just put it on backward." He frowned, looked down, and sighed. "Well, then I'll get better. At diapers. At telling the truth. At loving you out loud." Zara's laughter filled the room, a sound so gentle it seemed to stitch the air back together. She reached over and stroked Ao's cheek, watching him twitch in his sleep, a perfect mix of innocence and possibility. Then her gaze lifted to Kendrick. "I was angry because it hurt," she said quietly. "You made me believe you were one of us, someone who knew what it meant to struggle. And then I found out you could have left that pain any time you wanted." Kendrick swallowed, guilt washing over his face. "But," she continued, "you ran with me. You carried me when I couldn't walk. You stood outside the theater like your own heart was on the table. I believe you want to be better." He stepped closer, kneeling beside the bed. From his pocket he drew out a small velvet box. Zara blinked, startled. Inside was not the loud, glittering diamond of his past, but a single warm, clear stone, simple and sincere. It caught the morning light just enough to gleam like truth. "Marry me," Kendrick said, his voice low but steady. "Not for the house on the hill, not for who I was. For here, where stew simmers and babies snore, and we learn to start again." Zara's eyes filled with tears, bright and trembling. For a heartbeat, the world felt perfectly still. Then she smiled through it, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes." Kendrick laughed, a sound messy, relieved, and full of wonder. He pressed his forehead to hers, then kissed her hand, then Ao's tiny fingers. The baby stirred, stretching as if blessing the moment. Later that afternoon, they stepped out into the world together. The same city that had once mocked his loneliness now felt like home. Kendrick pushed the stroller carefully down a noisy street while Zara walked beside him, her hand threaded through his. The air was thick with the usual Lagos rhythm, horns, hawkers, hustle, but something inside him had shifted forever. He looked down at his son, at the small face half covered by a blanket, and then at Zara, whose smile carried both strength and peace. He'd spent years chasing towers and titles, mistaking ownership for purpose. But here, in this chaos of heat and laughter, he understood. Love wasn't something to earn or buy. It was something to keep showing up for. Everything he truly wanted had been waiting, not in marble halls or millionaire deals, but in a small apartment, a borrowed blanket, and a woman who had taught him the simplest, hardest truth. Love isn't expensive. It's faithful. And finally, Kendrick Adeyemi, once the loneliest man in Lagos, was home.